Chapter 1. Is He Really a Genius? November, 1248. Deep within the Blue Mountains, pale peaks rose into the cold air, while the valley trees were sheathed in thick snow, like a painting of silver-clad beauty. In the silent valley, the occasional whisper of wind sent showers of powdery snow drifting through the air. A biting chill hung over everything, as if the world itself were wound tight against the cold. On the snow, a small snow hare was foraging. Its fur was the color of fresh snow, soft and round like a cotton ball, its long ears twitching, as if constantly alert. It didn't notice the young man, hidden in a shallow drift about 10 meters away. He had short black hair like midnight, and wore a heavy cold-weather jacket, moleskin gloves, and a white cloak tied over everything. Snow dusted the cloak enough that he almost blended into the landscape. His dark eyes were fixed on the hare. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for a hunting knife at his waist. The hare twitched and bolted, sensing danger. The young man snapped into action, drawing the knife and flicking his wrist. A silver flash, his short blade pinned the hare to the snow. Hot blood splattered across the white crimson against the winter field. He stepped forward, withdrew the knife, and drove it in again to end the animal's suffering. A faint warmth slid through the weapon into his body. It was subtle, so slight he might have missed it if he hadn't been paying attention. He thought the word panel in his mind. Golden lines of text unfurled before his vision like a waterfall. Linn. Skills: Wolf School Swordsmanship Mastery. Attribute points: 1, 99%, 2%. It's finally done, he whispered inwardly. Linn felt a thrill as he looked at the flashing golden plus sign next to the skill on his attribute panel. He forced down the urge to immediately dump points into it, instead grabbing the hare by the ears and carrying it back along the path he had come. Time had flown. Before he knew it, he'd been living in this world for 2.5 months. At first, he'd needed days to accept the fact that he'd transmigrated, woken up in the body of a child who had just passed the trial of the grasses. He still remembered the absurdity of it. Posting a comment on the Cheatian app and falling asleep, then waking up in the world of The Witcher. He knew this world was dangerous. Fiends stalked the wilds, human kingdoms bled one another dry with endless wars, and ordinary lives were perilous. Sometimes even kings couldn't keep their heads. Compared with his old world, this one was brutal. But Linn had one firm advantage. On the first day he'd arrived, he discovered he was bound to a Witcher-only attribute panel. As someone raised on video games, he recognized instantly what it meant. The panel was the foundation for shaping his fate here. If he didn't want to be consumed by the world, he had to learn skills, raise them, and earn attribute points. He learned how to get them by killing creatures. The stronger the creature, the more experience he gained. When his experience gauge filled, he received attribute points. The only skill he knew at first, Wolf School Swordsmanship, needed 2 points to upgrade. It had taken him 2.5 months to finally gather them. Half an hour later, a dilapidated stronghold came into view. Kaer Morhen, base and school of the Wolf School Witchers, loomed in the midday haze. Even in ruin, it retained a stoic grandeur. At its height, the fortress had thrummed with life from the halls to the training fields. Now only the cold wind cut through its empty courtyards. Crossing the remaining bridge over the moat, Linn walked into the great hall. The fire was roaring in the hearth, throwing warm light and the smell of stew into the room. A lone, heavy table sat in the center. It could have seated 10, but now it held only 2. The old Witcher, setting plates down, gestured toward him. Vesemir, Grand Master of the Wolf School, moved with the quiet authority of a man who had lived through the place's entire history. No one knew his exact age. He was said to have watched Kaer Morhen's first stones be laid and seen its later sieges. Despite his years, he was still vigorous. "You're just in time," Vesemir said. "I was about to go look for you. Sit, child. It's time to eat." Linn nodded, put the hare in the kitchen, washed his hands, and returned to the table. Vesemir had already portioned the meal: meat, bread, and vegetables. Bread and veg on Linn's plate matched Vesemir's, but the chunk of meat served to him was noticeably larger. "Eat," Vesemir said gruffly. "You need nutrition. Eat more." Linn felt something warm inside. Witcher life was hard, and resources at Kaer Morhen were scarce. Though Witchers risked themselves to hunt fiends, their pay was often meager. Vesemir traded with the mountain villages for food, but he always made sure the youngsters had enough meat, as a father would. After dinner, Linn volunteered to wash the dishes, then went back to his room. There was no entertainment, no electricity, no net, so nighttime was usually for sleep. Tonight he had other plans. He lay down, called up his panel, and watched the golden text appear. Linn. Skills. Wolf School Swordsmanship, Mastery. Attribute points, 2%. His fingers tingled with excitement. He didn't hesitate. He imagined an invisible finger pressing the plus sign beside Wolf School Swordsmanship. The attribute points counter fell from 2 to 0. The word mastery next to the skill went briefly blurred and then resolved to proficiency. Linn inhaled sharply. A torrent of memory and technique poured into his mind, sword forms, stances, timing, filling his head in an instant. It was as if he'd lived through years of training in a matter of seconds. His body felt different, tuned. He picked up the training sword by his bed, took a standard stance, and cut the air hard. The blade whistled. He could feel his speed and strength had improved, perhaps by 5%, he guessed. He set the sword down with a satisfied smile. He'd always suspected the panel was real, but now he could feel it, a tangible path to growth. In a world of knives and monsters, what was more valuable than that? The next morning on the training field, dew still beating the wooden practice dummy, two figures were already sparring. Good. That's enough, Vesemir said, stepping between them. Linn lowered his sword. How was my performance, Vesemir? Early that morning, he'd asked Vesemir to spar. Vesemir had expected the boy to need more time with the dummy before testing himself against a real opponent, but Linn's progress surprised him. The 13-year-old's Wolf School swordsmanship had leapt forward. In pure technique and execution, he already moved like a proper witcher. Vesemir's smile was edged with surprise. Could this child be a genius? He kept his tone steady, though. You've improved fast, but don't let it go to your head. Your swordsmanship still has gaps. Stay humble and keep training. Linn listened carefully and replied with solemn respect. Yes, Vesemir, I know skill has no limit. If Linn's rapid improvement pleased Vesemir, his humility pleased him even more. Vesemir's face softened. Very good. Continue your practice. This afternoon we begin fiend lore. Linn bowed and returned to his drills, the memory of the panel's golden words still warm in his mind. Chapter 2. You are the best among this group of newcomers. For a witcher, knowledge of monsters and experience fighting them are as important as a sword. Those lessons are learned in blood, passed down by predecessors. If you can't identify the creature you're facing from its tracks, the fight becomes infinitely harder, and you look foolish and ignorant. Today, the first monster we'll cover is the ghoul, Vesemir said. Ghouls feed on corpses. They frequent cemeteries, old tombs, any place the dead are buried, he continued. They're drawn to the scent of fresh graves, so you'll find them near newly dug tombs, battlefields, graveyards. They usually hunt in small groups, sometimes led by a larger ghoul. If they get the chance, they'll go after the living, especially when they have the numbers. Linn listened closely in the castle's dim lecture room. When Vesemir closed the book, he looked straight at him. Linn, do you remember the ghoul's weaknesses? Linn didn't hesitate. Only fire, silver, and bright sunlight can harm a ghoul. Vesemir approved with a slight smile. Exactly. A witcher carries two swords. The silver sword is used against monsters. Linn had learned that already. He also knew a silver sword wasn't made entirely of silver. It was a steel core plated with silver. Pure silver weapons are expensive and impractical, and the silver plating on a steel blade is enough to harm those things that crossed into this world at the conjunction of the spheres. A witcher needs more than masterful swordplay. He must master knowledge and craft. Monsters don't fight fair or alone. Hunting them relies on the brain as much as the blade. Before you face a creature, you must know its type, name, characteristics, and weaknesses so you can pick the right weapon and oil. Get that judgment wrong. That was why so few witchers died quietly of old age. After a pause, Vesemir asked again, What's the difference between a ghoul and a flesh-eating ghoul? Linn answered almost at once. The flesh-eating ghoul has 3 bone crowns on its head. Vesemir nodded. Good. A flesh-eating ghoul is far more dangerous than a regular ghoul. Even the smallest wound from one can infect a person with necrophage poison. Which potion counters necrophage poison? Golden Oriole, Linn said. Vesemir's approval showed. Correct. Still, better to avoid the poison entirely. When you fight a flesh-eating ghoul, don't engage in close quarters. Keep your distance and use a jumping slash at the right moment. Life at Kaer Morhen moved slowly and predictably. Sword training, lessons on monsters, and trips into the mountains to hunt game. The experience Linn earned from hunting animals was minimal. He needed to accumulate a lot before he'd gain even a single attribute point. He wasn't anxious. Witchers lived a long time, and he was only 13. He had time. Maybe killing monsters would grant more experience, but he knew his limits. Even if his blade were strong, in other aspects he was still an apprentice. Better to be cautious. This wasn't a game with save files and retries. Mistakes had real consequences. Time passed, and winter came sooner than Linn expected. Kaer Morhen sat deep in the Blue Mountains, north of the kingdom of Kaedwen. The cold there bit harder, and the blizzards were worse. Witchers of the Wolf School usually returned to Kaer Morhen for the winter unless duty kept them away. This was Linn's first winter in this world. The first snow began as tiny flakes but turned into a night-long blizzard. By morning, the walls were buried in drifts. Before dawn, Linn and Vesemir were out shoveling snow to clear a path. They worked until the rising sun, when the sound of hooves and boots broke the morning stillness. 3 men led 3 heavily laden horses through the gate. The man at the front had white hair, a handsome, tall face trimmed with a beard that only added to his ruggedness. Behind him came 2 black-haired men who looked younger. One had a knife scar running from eye to cheek. The other's face was marked with severe scarring. Geralt, Lambert, Eskel, welcome home, Vesemir called. The 3 fell into Vesemir's embrace. Then they turned and looked at Linn. Is this the lad who survived the trial of the grasses? One of them asked. Before Linn had come to this world, there had been several other children at Kaer Morhen, abandoned infants Vesemir had taken in. Most of them had died during the trial of the grasses. The trial is the second stage of a witcher's mutations and a brutal, necessary ordeal. Only a small fraction survive. Usually the survival rate is around 30%. Even Kaer Morhen, with its better heritage, only manages about 40%. Lambert sneered. Kid, looks like you're the best of those children. Geralt rubbed his forehead. Shut up, Lambert. What? Said something wrong? Lambert shrugged. Even if the boy survives that last horrible trial, what good will it do? He'll be dead in some swamp within a year. Vesemir's voice cut in. Lambert, the winter's just arrived. You wouldn't want to spend the next few months with an old man in this crumbling castle, would you? Lambert fell silent. Geralt knelt, put a hand on Linn's shoulder, and spoke softly. Linn nodded. He hadn't taken Lambert's words to heart anyway. Lambert was always brusque and sarcastic, ill-tempered, quick with a rude remark. But beneath that harsh exterior, he was loyal and protective. His bitterness had reasons. Lambert had once been given to Kaer Morhen as payment under the law of surprise after his alcoholic father was rescued by a witcher. He hated the place sometimes, but when Kaer Morhen needed defending, he never hesitated to stand and fight. Vesemir, hands on his hips, gave orders. Save the talking for tonight, Linn. Help Geralt bring the horses in and stay inside. Don't come back out. Review the monster lessons I taught you. To the rest of you, he added, you're just in time. Grab the tools and help shovel. Chapter 3. Who's Your Daddy? The fire in the hearth warmed the hall, driving back the chill that crept in through the cracks in the doors and windows. Dinner had been rich. Geralt and the others had brought back a full load of supplies from the outside, enough to see them through the whole winter. Even if they did nothing, they would not have to worry about food. The mood at the table was bright. Kaer Morhen was the Wolf School's stronghold, but its witchers only gathered there like this once a year, during winter. Even Vesemir, who trained apprentices, would sometimes go down the mountain to villages at the foot of the Blue Mountains to take monster contracts and earn enough coin to keep the apprentices fed. Geralt, Eskel, and Lambert talked like boys who had been hard at work all season, trading stories of their exploits, while Vesemir listened with a smile, like a contented old father at home. The evening remained easygoing until Lambert mentioned a name. Did Berengar say if he's coming back this winter? He asked. Geralt and Eskel fell silent, as if Lambert had spoken a taboo. Vesemir set his beer down and shook his head. I thought he'd come back with you. Lambert scowled. That brat. How many winters has it been since he was last here? Has he forgotten who he is? Lambert, drink up, Geralt said, clinking his glass against Lambert's. At the sound of the name, an outline of a man formed in Linn's mind. Berengar had once been one of the Witchers of the Wolf School, but unlike the others, he never felt at home at Kaer Morhen. He hated what being a Witcher had taken from him, and despised the world's scorn. He wanted a wife and children, to be treated like a normal man instead of being spat at for his cat-like eyes. The Witcher's path had taken those possibilities away. In the original course of things, Berengar left Kaer Morhen for good and never returned to its warm hearths. In that way, he was like Lambert. Neither had become a Witcher by choice, but there was a difference. Despite his grumbles, Lambert still saw Geralt and the others as comrades and family. Berengar wanted to cut off everything that tied him to being a Witcher. Let's not dwell on unhappy things, Lambert growled. Talk about something else. Eskel slid 2 brand-new decks of cards onto the table. All eyes turned to them. I was escorting a dwarf merchant caravan not long ago, he said. The caravan leader gave me these. He says the game's called Gwent. It's an old dwarven pastime, a kind of board thing at first, but it's spreading. In some places, it's starting to replace dice. Lambert spat a mouthful of wine. Come on, Eskel. You don't actually believe that, do you? Eskel wiped the wine from his cheek. I don't know about replacing dice, but I've played a few hands. It's more interesting than rolling to see who's higher. Want to play? Vesemir, older and less taken with novelties, was reluctant. Geralt and Lambert waved him on. Neither wanted to be the first. Then Linn surprised them by volunteering. Can I try? Eskel glanced at Vesemir. Linn read the worry on his face and added quickly, We'll just play cards, no gambling. Vesemir shrugged, unbothered. Doesn't matter. Hothouse flowers will have to feel wind and rain sooner or later. Best to get a little wet now than be caught off guard later. That settled it. Eskel explained the rules. Gwent, an ancient dwarven diversion, had fixed rules that had changed little over time. Though still mostly a dwarf thing, it wouldn't be long before humans, dwarves, elves, and halflings all played it, and a master-made dwarf card would be prized like a work of art. Linn and Eskel sat opposite one another and began their match. The others stood by to watch. Half an hour later, stunned silence filled the hall. Damn it, this is impossible, Geralt muttered. Dozens of gold coins. Coins from several realms, their edges catching the firelight, had been stacked in front of Linn. They had been Eskel's 30 minutes earlier. Linn forced an even expression. He didn't want to look smug. In truth, both decks Eskel had given them were basic Northern Realms decks, almost identical, so the game was purely a matter of skill. To everyone else, Linn had only met Gwent that evening. No one guessed he'd already put in over 1,000 hours playing. Think I'll give it a go, Lambert said, unable to resist after watching the duel. Linn gathered the cards and offered to teach him the rules. Lambert bristled. Kid, don't be cocky. Watch me beat you until you call me daddy. Another half hour later, laughter drowned out Lambert's bluster. Who's calling anybody daddy now? Linn teased, smiling. Lambert hurled his cards down in frustration. This blasted game, it'll never catch on. If it does, I'll eat every one of these cards. Geralt and Eskel laughed until they were bent double. Opportunities to needle Lambert were rare and too good to miss. Linn stifled a laugh and turned to Geralt. Anyone else want to go, White Wolf? Having watched his companions lose, Geralt waved him off. I'll pass. I'd rather spend my coin on wine or abalone. No one else wanted in, so Linn collected the shuffled cards into 2 neat decks and pushed them toward Eskel. Eskel only took one. I'm giving you the other deck, he said. Linn accepted it without hesitation, then pushed the pile of coins back across to Eskel. Take your money. I won't take what you earned out there. The hall went quiet. Surprise showed on Geralt's, Eskel's, and even Lambert's faces. Only Vesemir's looked relieved and approving. It's getting late. Time to get some rest, lads, Vesemir said, standing up. Then his face tightened. Do you hear that? At his words, Linn froze, and then he heard it too, a soft, measured sound of footsteps, almost imperceptible unless you had a witcher's heightened senses. Everyone turned toward the entrance as a man stepped out of the shadow and into the firelight. His hair was ash-colored, streaked with white at the temples. His face was pale, almost deathly, with an aquiline nose and a pair of vertical pupils set in yellow-green irises. He reached under his shirt and drew out a silver medallion. It caught the light, flashing. It was a cat's head, fangs bared. Chapter 4. If he is not decent, you help him to be decent. Cadaviero, what are you doing at Kaer Morhen? I don't recall inviting you. The Witchers of the Wolf School all rose to their feet. Vesemir stared into the shadows where a man stepped forward. Geralt reached for the silver candelabrum on the table. Eskel and Lambert moved to flank Linn protectively. As expected of the Wolfkin, your hearing's excellent, the newcomer taunted with a mocking smile. Brayhen, Cat School Witcher, sends his greetings. Vesemir's voice was ice. Spare us the courtesy. Kaer Morhen does not welcome Cat School Witchers. Watch your tone, old man. I'll give you one chance to put that another way. Don't forget, I have a sword in hand, and you don't. Brayhen ran his tongue along the cold, gleaming blade. Vesemir didn't flinch. You Cat School types may be fast, but don't forget, Wolf School Witchers don't only swing steel. We use signs, something you lot lack. No matter how fast you are, you still have to come within range to strike. That's long enough for us to cast signs, Brayhen shot back. Are you sure that leather will stand up to 4 Igni signs? Each Witcher School's mutations differ. The Wolf School's mutations favor balance. The Griffin School enhances signs. The Cat School, said to have been founded by someone of the Ensaid, what humans call elves, favored speed. Cat Witchers can attack twice or more in the time a regular soldier manages a single blow. That speed gives them a distinct advantage against humans, but it comes at a cost. The Cat School's ability to cast signs is the weakest of all the schools. Many Cat Witchers can't cast signs at all. Vesemir's threat hit home. Brayhen's smile faded. Hypocrites, he spat. You sit at the same table as the Butcher of Bravican. Why can't you be magnanimous and accept an executioner? Vesemir stood and pointed. Because we are not like you. Leave, Cadaveru. If you won't go willingly, we'll see you out. Brayhen's eyes darted. He sneered. Witchers don't fight Witchers. That's our code, old man. You want to break it? If anyone broke it first, it was your Cat School, Vesemir replied coldly. And I won't hesitate in your case. If you're about to spit, I suggest you swallow it, else I'll use your face to wipe my floor. Brayhen forced the spit back and swallowed. For a few moments, the two sides faced one another in silence. Brayhen finally gave a bored, bitter laugh and melted back into the shadows. The great hall settled. Only the fire hissed in the hearth. He's gone, Vesemir said, exhaling. Geralt, Eskel, Lambert, take Linn upstairs to rest. It's late. I'll stay with you, Vesemir, Geralt said, standing. Don't argue. You're old. You need someone watching your back. Vesemir considered, then nodded. That'll do. Eskel, Lambert, get some sleep. Tomorrow you'll see our guest off the Blue Mountains. Linn, lad, Vesemir added, directing his next words partly at the two, partly at the boy. Don't dwell on tonight. Forget it. Linn nodded. He was sensible and said nothing. Eskel and Lambert escorted him from the hall. They took Linn to his room upstairs. We're sleeping next door, Eskel said. If you're scared or can't sleep, come find us. Thanks, Eskel. Thanks, Lambert. As Linn walked to his door, Lambert called after him, half amused. Kid, don't you want to ask anything? No need. Good night. Kaer Morhen's rooms weren't very soundproof. Even with the door shut, thin gaps and panels let noises leak through. Linn stripped, lay on the bed, and stared at the ceiling. He wasn't putting on a show of maturity. He simply had nothing to ask. He already knew more than Eskel and Lambert did about why Vesemir hated the Cat School. Long ago, when Geralt was still an apprentice, the Cat School betrayed the Wolf School. The King of Coden, seduced by a sorcerer who feared Witchers would undermine his rule, lured the Wolf School out under the pretense of a martial contest and bribed the Cat School to attack them. It ended in a massacre. Only Geralt and Vesemir escaped. Geralt survived by the skin of his teeth with the help of a druid. From that moment, Vesemir's distrust of the Cat School hardened into hatred. Every Witcher school sprung from the old order, but each inherited different formulas for the trial of the grasses. The Cat School's trial was unusual because, when they split from the order, their founders attempted to steal the original formula. The order reclaimed it. The Cat founders were forced to find new mutation pathways. They eventually succeeded, but at a cost. Their trial did not suppress emotions the way the others did. If anything, it amplified them, tipping those who endured it toward extremes: paranoia, obsession, cruelty. Many cat witchers became madmen, psychopaths, sadists. They took on assassination contracts. Their moral lines were elastic. Brehen was scum even among them. Geralt's nickname, Butcher of Bravican, had stuck because of frightened townsfolk. Unknown to them, Geralt had often protected them. Brehen's title, Cat of Ero, and the slaughter at Ero were fully his doing. With Geralt and Vesemir keeping watch, Linn slept soundly. He rose very early the next morning. Ever since coming to this world, he'd broken his old habit of sleeping late. Now he woke and rose at once. In the hall, he found Geralt and Vesemir meditating on the floor. In dangerous places, witchers can meditate in place of sleep, restoring energy and clearing fatigue while remaining alert to their surroundings, able to snap out of the trance at the first sign of movement. At the sound of Linn's footsteps, both men opened their eyes. Linn exchanged morning greetings and volunteered to make breakfast. Eskel and Lambert came down soon after. After eating the simple fare Linn had prepared, Eskel grabbed his sword and nudged Lambert. "Come on, Lambert, let's see our cat school friend off. Don't want him getting lost in the Blue Mountains." Lambert, unusually quiet, merely nodded. When they left, Linn and the others sat at the long table and finished their meal. "Vesemir," Geralt asked, spearing a piece of meat with his fork, "what should Linn learn today?" Vesemir took a pull of beer and thought a moment. "His swordplay's progressed nicely. Starting today, I'll begin teaching him signs. After all, signs are an important part of being a witcher." "I'll take it," Geralt offered. "You get some rest after breakfast and I'll teach him." Vesemir smiled with a hint of relief. "Not that old yet, lad, but you can have it. All right, leave it to you." Chapter 5. The Hospitality of the Yunnan People, the Simple Customs of Undying Street Clang. Clang, clang! The training yard rang with the steady percussion of metal on metal. Linn and Geralt, each holding an unsharpened sword, traded blows with quick, practiced motions. Sparks flew where their blades met. They sparred long enough that finally Geralt stepped back and lowered his sword. "Not bad," he said. "From a swordsmanship standpoint, you're already at the level of a proper witcher." Lambert was right. Eskel's voice echoed from the sidelines earlier. "You're the best of this batch of newcomers. I've never seen anyone take to the sword so quickly during their apprenticeship." "Next, signs training," Geralt went on. Linn let his breath out and lowered his sword. Even though his wolf school swordplay had reached mastery, the duel had shown him Geralt hadn't been using his full strength. That made sense. This was Geralt, after all, the protagonist of so many stories and games. In a previous life, Linn had scoffed at tales of heroes felled by pitchforks. Only after getting killed repeatedly by pitchforks in Bloodborne did he learn the hard way that mundane things could be lethal. "We witchers don't favor the elaborate spells sorceresses use," Geralt explained. "We prefer quick, one-handed spells for combat. Sorceresses sneer and call them cantrips, but for us they're signs. They're simple, perhaps, but used right, they're very effective. I'll show you each one." First, Igni. Geralt made the hand gesture, palms flaring. A jet of flame shot from his palm and scorched a patch of muddy ground. Anyone standing in its path would have been badly burned. Then Quen. A bright orange shield shimmered around him. "Now hit me. Full strength. Don't hold back. Don't worry, it won't hurt me." Linn raised his training sword and brought it down with everything he had. Clang! The blow rebounded like it had struck a heavy tower shield. Pain numbed the tiger's mouth of his hand and nearly made him lose his grip. The orange shield held. Geralt dispelled the Quen and took a step forward. "You all right?" Linn shook his hand free. "I'm fine, just a bit numb." Geralt checked his palm and, satisfied, continued. "When you cast Quen and your opponent feels that numbness, you can use the moment to finish them. But Quen has two modes. One is continuous casting. Keep feeding chaotic energy into it, and the shield won't collapse easily. The downside is you can't move or attack while sustaining it. You have to stay focused. The other makes a static shield that doesn't require continuous input, but it's fragile and collapses easily. Choosing which mode to use takes judgment. There's another defensive sign, Heliotrop. Like Quen, it's cast with crossed hands and is meant to defend against magical attacks." Linn nodded, following the explanations. Next, Eredin. Geralt slapped the ground and several purple sigils flared up. Anything caught inside slows down, like stuck in quicksand. Eredin is excellent for fighting groups. Even a master swordsman is vulnerable when swarmed. Sometimes a cheap thrust from behind, a pitchfork for example, can end you. Witchers and sorceresses alike aren't invulnerable. Use Eredin to break enemy coordination. It also forces specters and similar monsters to manifest physically, which is crucial against them. Finally, Ard. Geralt thrust his palm toward a straw and wood dummy. Bang! An invisible wall of air smashed into it, sending the dummy flying and splintering. Straw rained down like confetti. "You saw Ard's effect," Geralt said, as he brushed straw from his coat. Like Eredin, Ard is good for multiple foes, but its force drops off with distance, and it's less effective on huge monsters or heavily armored opponents. Geralt glanced at Linn and half smiled. "What's that look for?" Linn pointed at the ruined dummy and said dryly, "That dummy took Vesemir a whole day to finish." Geralt's expression froze. He looked comically disheveled now, the elegant flourish of his Ard replaced by someone rummaging through the muck for straw. Linn helped gather the scattered straw while Geralt set about repairing the dummy. Nearby, Linn practiced his signs. He started with Quen. He concentrated, forming the gesture. Magic rose inside him like a tide toward his left hand and then released. A bright orange shield bloomed around him, but it flickered like a badly wired lantern. It wouldn't take much to break it. "That's normal," Geralt called over while fixing the dummy. "It's always like that at first. You can't expect perfect stability right away. Practice." Linn didn't feel discouraged. He kept at it until the sun went down. Eskel and Lambert hadn't returned that evening, nor the next. It wasn't until the third night that the two finally came back. On the training ground, Geralt eyed them. "How did it go? Our cat school friend didn't get lost in the Blue Mountains, did he?" Lambert grinned. "No, we saw him off in person. As a courtesy, he gave us an international friendly gesture." He moved to demonstrate before Eskel barked. "Lambert, there's a child here." Linn, still practicing nearby, didn't care. It was just a middle finger. He'd seen worse. He even knew a few ways that gesture could be used. Chapter 6. I, Linn, reached my current level because of my extraordinary talent. Time passed day by day. After Brehen's expulsion from the Blue Mountains, Kaer Morhen returned to its usual quiet. Linn's days were full and satisfying. Every morning, he stayed on the training yard practicing signs. In the afternoons, he went out into the mountains with Geralt, Eskel, or Lambert. Normally, Wolf School witchers returning to Kaer Morhen preferred to lounge about the castle. Life outside had been harsh and competitive enough. Why go back to hunting monsters? There was no reward for killing random beasts in the mountains, so what was the point? None of the three wanted to go. But Linn kept insisting, and Vesemir believed that the more training Linn received before he left the mountain, the better he would adapt to a witcher's life, and the higher his chances of surviving out in the world. At the old man's request, even Lambert, with a sour face, reluctantly agreed. With those 3 seasoned witchers hunting alongside him, Linn finally experienced real monster work. He made one special request. The final blow had to be his. The others found it odd, but didn't object. For the next month, the monsters of the Blue Mountains suffered. Once content to ignore anything that didn't threaten Kaer Morhen, the Wolf School witchers now hunted relentlessly. Geralt, Eskel, and Lambert were each dangerous on their own. Together they were unstoppable. They would drive a monster to its knees, and Linn would step in for the killing stroke. Having veterans guide him felt incredible. Monsters granted much greater experience than ordinary animals, and in a month, Linn gained far more attribute points than he had in all his previous time. One snowy afternoon, Linn stood at his window watching flakes drift down, muffling the mountains in a soft white blanket. The castle felt warm and secure compared to the cold outside. He wasn't just admiring the view, he was staring at his status panel. Linn's skills: Wolf School swordsmanship. Signs: beginner. Attribute points: 3, 0%. Thanks to the past weeks of signs practice, signs had finally appeared on his panel. The 3 attribute points were the direct result of Geralt and the others carrying him through fights for over a month. He weighed his options. He could continue improving swordsmanship, but higher ranks would cost many points. Upgrading Wolf School swordsmanship from proficient to mastered would cost 2 points, and moving beyond that would require an even steeper investment, 5 points. If he kept pouring points into swordplay, he'd be extremely specialized, but the Wolf School favored balanced development. The other option was to dump all 3 points into signs, raising them from beginner to proficient, a perfect fit. Linn made his choice. He tapped the plus sign beside signs. The skill label shifted. Beginner blurred into mastered, and then, with another tap, mastered became proficient. A flood of practice memories poured into him like rivers into the sea, decades worth of repetition and instinct condensed into his mind. The transfer finished, and Linn raised his hand to form the Quen sign. A bright orange glow flared into being, forming a shield that wrapped around him. He grinned. It worked. Before this, he could force signs to happen only with unstable focus. They were scarcely usable in combat. The Quen he now cast was solid, reliable. He no longer had to concentrate obsessively. A mere thought brought the signs into being, as natural as picking up chopsticks. He tested the other signs in turn, Quen, Igni, Ard, Eredin, and each showed real improvement. Axii was harder to try without a suitable target, so he left it alone. In the space of a month, he had reached the level of a formal Witcher in signs, progress that would normally have taken years. By the time he truly left the mountain, he might be stronger than many full Witchers. 2 days later, they went back out. I still don't understand why we have to bring this kid with us. We're not his babysitters, Lambert grumbled as they walked. Linn raised 2 fingers. First, I have a name, Linn. Second, I can take care of myself. Lambert snorted. When you've passed the trial of the grasses, then we'll talk names. For now, quiet, kid. You started the talking, Linn shot back, rolling his eyes, then looked at the scarred-faced Witcher beside him. Eskel, how can you stand him? Eskel shrugged helplessly. Sometimes we don't understand him either, but while Lambert's words are unpleasant, we'd do better not to keep arguing. They fell silent. The 3 of them found a clearing and drove a wooden stake into the snow, tying a sheep to it. Then they hid in a nearby copse, waiting. It was basic forktail baiting from Brother Adalbert's Bestiary, page 28. A few days earlier, while Linn had been poring over monster lore in the castle, he'd heard a distant roar and seen a forktail flying past. Monsters were common in the Blue Mountains, but it was unusual to have one so close to Kaer Morhen. That, more than anything, had decided them to investigate. When spring came and the winter snows melted, the Witchers would leave Kaer Morhen. That would include Vesemir. Only Linn would remain behind. What if something happened while the keep was nearly empty? After a unanimous decision, they'd agreed to kill any forktail that dared come near Kaer Morhen. That's why the 3 of them were out here now, hiding in the bushes. For a while, they waited patiently, then a piercing roar split the silence. A black shape circled the sky, having clearly spotted the goat tied to the stake. The goat bleated and strained, but uselessly. Linn had checked the knot twice to make sure it couldn't break free. Kid, hide in these bushes. Don't come out on your own. Wait until I call you, Lambert said, sharp-tongued but not unkind. Enough talk. Let's go, Lambert, Eskel interrupted. The forktail screeched and dove, going for the goat like any predator on the hunt. Eskel and Lambert became 2 black streaks flinging themselves from cover. The trial of the grasses had given them bodies far beyond ordinary humans, not invulnerability, but strength, speed, and reflexes that were lethal in their hands. The forktail, unaware that danger lurked, was still busy at the bait. Eskel didn't hesitate. He swung at the base of the monster's tail. Blood sprayed. The forktail screamed and whipped its tail back. Its name came from that terrible appendage, long, sharp barbs that could cleave an oak shield. Eskel rolled clear of the sweeping blow. While it lashed out, Lambert followed up, striking into the wound Eskel had opened. More blood spurted, splattering the snow. The creature's shriek grew higher, then it spun, eyes blazing with hate. The forktail reared and opened its mouth. Watch out! Sound rippled out in visible rings. Its roar didn't have the subtlety of sonic hunters, but the blast could still stun anyone caught inside it. The Witchers staggered back, but the creature didn't press its advantage. It beat its wings and took to the air, smart enough to know it couldn't win a sustained fight with them. It's getting away! Don't let it! They chased, but the forktail flew fast and soon climbed beyond the range of the silver sword. Witchers had no real mid- or long-range options. From that distance, a fleeing monster could not be stopped. Just as it cleared the bushes where they'd hidden, an invisible wave of air shot up and struck the beast's belly. It wailed and fell from the sky like a kite with a broken string, sliding across the snow. "Kid!" Lambert's stomach dropped when Linn stepped out of the undergrowth. He and Eskel exchanged a look and rushed to his side. Linn was technically a graduate, he'd completed the trials, but training and real combat were a different thing. Many witchers who had descended the mountain were felled within a year. They feared recklessness. What surprised them was Linn's restraint. He didn't sprint in with a sword. He stopped a few meters from the fallen forktail and raised his hand. A bright stream of fire shot from his palm and slammed into the creature's wings. He'd heard Lambert's warning, of course, but he wasn't foolish. A wounded monster was often more dangerous. With Eskel and Lambert at his side, there was no need to gamble on a reckless close-in attack. Stall, disable, then finish together. The Igni burst hit the wings. Flames licked the membranes. The forktail, now unable to fly, thrashed and rolled on the ground trying to put its wings out. That bought enough time. Eskel and Lambert closed in, slashing brutally. The beast bled into the snow, wounds opening one after another. When what remained of its strength drained away and it could no longer stand, Linn ended it. Thud. His silver sword avoided the horned ram-like head and came down hard on the nape. The forktail gave a mournful cry and went still. A hot, warm current flowed up the blade and into Linn. It felt different from the small kills he'd done before. He glanced at his attribute panel without thinking. Attribute points 0%, 0, 8%. The experience had fed him more than a rabbit or a fox ever could. The three of them shared a tired, satisfied grin. Lambert, whose tongue was usually sharp, offered rare praise. "Well done, kid. Honestly, you surprised me." Eskel simply gave a big thumbs up. Chapter 8. I love learning. Learning makes me happy. Time passed quickly. For Linn, whose days were full and life felt rewarding, this winter seemed to fly by. By late February, the peaks of the Blue Mountains were still white, but the snow at their base had begun to melt. Around that time, Geralt, Eskel, and Lambert all left the castle. The supplies they had brought back last winter were all used up over the cold months. If they didn't want to return to an empty, freezing keep, they had to leave and earn coin with their own hands. Linn's swordsmanship and mastery of signs had reached the level of a full-fledged witcher, so Vesemir felt comfortable leaving Kaer Morhen in his care. After all, 3 men trying to maintain 2 strongholds was less practical than 4 concentrating on one, and so Linn was left alone. With Vesemir and the others gone, the fortress suddenly felt emptier, and so did Linn's heart. He'd been in this world for less than a year, but he'd already come to think of Vesemir and Geralt as family. Maybe it was because, in his previous life, he had been an orphan, never knowing what family felt like, living in a big city where everyone hurried and grew colder by the day. Since he'd arrived here, the men of the Wolf School, even the sharp-tongued Lambert, had treated him like one of their own, and he treasured that more than he could say. But having come from another life, Linn knew tragedy could come without warning. He wanted to do what he could to prevent it. So even without supervision, Linn stayed diligent. Every day he went into the mountains to hunt, carefully, choosing isolated, weak monsters. He understood well that even newly minted witchers faced a perilous first year outside the keep. Surviving required patience and caution. He'd rather gain experience slowly than gamble his life for quick glory. In the evenings, he lost himself in Kaer Morhen's vast library. After the Griffin School's stronghold at Kaer Seren was buried by a mage-made avalanche, Kaer Morhen was the last place that preserved a large portion of Witcher lore. Linn meditated only 3 hours a day, using those hours to replace normal sleep, and spent the rest of his nights in the books. He devoured every volume on monsters, and in 3 months had absorbed more than he'd expected. His original plan had been to memorize all the monster lore over the course of a year, and then learn alchemy from Geralt and the others when they returned. But his memories from a previous life made him unusually quick. He understood things instantly and could extrapolate from what he read. To his surprise, 3 months was enough. Linn couldn't help smiling to himself ruefully. Who knew learning too fast could be a problem? His days were still filled with hunting, but his evenings were suddenly free. He couldn't let the time go to waste. Sitting alone in the empty great hall, eating his breakfast, an idea struck him. Why wait for Geralt and the others to teach him alchemy? Kaer Morhen had an alchemical lab. The books were here, and the herbs grew in the mountains. He'd collected monster parts over the past months. Self-study might be slower than having a teacher, but he could afford a few extra tries. If the system allowed him to add a skill through practice, there was nothing to lose. Linn was all action. If he thought of something, he had to try it right away. After breakfast, he went to the alchemical lab. The room was different from other labs. Thick stone walls, a gloomy, practical air. He found a worn volume labeled Potion Notes, lit a candle, and began to read. The first recipe he studied was for Swallow, a potion named for the bird, associated with spring and renewal. Swallow accelerated healing and recovery, was common, and had no dangerous side effects. It could also counteract some other potions' adverse effects. He read the brewing instructions carefully, several times, then gathered celandine and a drowner brain from the herb rack and set them in a mortar. He crushed and ground them with a pestle, set a cauldron over the fire, poured in a measure of dwarf spirit, and snapped his fingers, then used the igni sign to light the flame. When the spirit in the cauldron began to boil, he added the crushed celandine and drowner brain and stirred. The liquid slowly reddened. After 15 minutes, he put out the flame, waited for the brew to cool, and decanted it into a cylindrical bottle. He shook the bottle and watched the liquid darken from red to black, and a foul smell rose. Failed? He thought, but kept calm. He reread the notes, then set them aside and cradled his right elbow in his left hand, tapping his cheek with his fist as he considered the process. It must be a heat problem. I'll try with a lower temperature. 3 days later, Linn held a cylindrical bottle of true red liquid and felt a rush of satisfaction. He had succeeded. Swallow was a basic witcher potion, but blending it correctly for the first time thrilled him. He opened his attribute panel. Nothing had changed. Witcher alchemy in the system covered 3 areas: blade oils, potions, and alchemical bombs. Was one successful brew not enough? Did he have to make every recipe before the panel would register anything? It turned out he was right. He kept working. Over the next 6 months, he brewed 8 kinds of blade oil, 18 potions, and 7 bombs. Then, suddenly, a line of golden text cascaded across his vision. New skill, alchemy, beginner. Linn invested all 3 attribute points he'd earned from monster hunts into the alchemy skill. The skill text blurred, then flashed, first to mastery, then to proficiency. A flood of alchemical memories poured into his mind. When the transmission finished, he found himself holding the accumulated knowledge and experience of a lifetime of lab work. He closed his eyes and felt those memories as if he had truly spent decades in that workshop, mixing and distilling day and night. He breathed out and returned to the table, moving to the materials as if by instinct. This time, his hands didn't hesitate. The whole process flowed naturally. When he decided to make a bottle of Swallow, his body performed the steps automatically and flawlessly. He not only produced a proper potion with less effort, he did it far faster. In terms of alchemy, Linn had reached the level expected of a full witcher. By a river deep in the Blue Mountains, the shrieks and wails of drowners shattered the mountain's hush. Linn swung his silver sword, severing a drowner's head, then pulled back and dodged another leaping creature. Its blade-like claws sliced through empty air. Linn stepped forward, gripping the hilt with both hands, raised the sword above his head, and brought it down in a powerful chop. Thwack! Blood spattered as the silver sword split the drowner's skull. A third drowner closed in from behind. The sword had become lodged in the corpse from the force of the last blow. It wouldn't come free easily. Linn's face showed no panic. He turned, extended his right hand toward the drowner, and whispered, "Igni." A torrent of flame shot into the creature's face. It howled and fell, frantically scrabbling mud across its burned features as if that could help. Linn stepped on the corpse, wrenched the sword free, then flicked his arm. The silver sword flew like a streaking meteor and pinned the drowner to the ground. The last drowner, suddenly showing a flicker of human-like fear, turned and fled. Linn did not pursue. He checked the gains from the fight. Attribute points: 4, 86%, 5, 1%. It wasn't easy finally getting 5 attribute points. Linn thought for a moment and decided to spend them on Wolf School swordsmanship. Signs and alchemy mattered, but those could wait. Martial skill needed priority. He imagined a finger and tapped Wolf School swordsmanship. Wolf School swordsmanship, proficient, Wolf School swordsmanship, master limit. New perk, full enhancement, speed plus 20%, strength 20%, constitution 20%. A flood of swordsmanship memories poured into Linn's head. Unlike before, these were not dull training drills. They were full of combat experience, bloody lessons, fighting humans, fighting monsters, one-on-one and one against many, desperate struggles and counterattacks at the edge of survival. Memories others would only gain through a body full of scars were downloaded into Linn as if handed to him. When the lesson finished, his body showed no outward change, but he felt internal improvements. He pulled the silver sword from the drowner's corpse, swung a few times, and felt his speed and strength were indeed 20% greater. "Excellent," he murmured. This was power. Sudden, disordered footsteps sounded from behind. Linn turned. The drowner that had fled had come back, and it had brought a swamp hag. So it went for backup, Linn chuckled. If he'd run a minute earlier, he would be the one fleeing now. Swamp hags are monsters that even seasoned witchers approach cautiously, but with Wolf School swordsmanship at master and the full enhancement perk boosting his strength, speed, and constitution, Linn had confidence. He no longer had to run at the first sign of something stronger, as he'd done these past months. "You're just right for practice," he said. He lunged like an ice wolf. Before the kicked-up soil had time to settle, Linn had closed the distance. The swamp hag's cloudy eyes narrowed. She grabbed the drowner beside her and hurled it at him. Linn swung the silver sword and cleaved the flying drowner from right shoulder to left flank. Blood and entrails sprayed into the air, and a dark shadow moved in behind the corpse. The swamp hag lunged, her scythe-like claws aiming for Linn's chest. Her claws could tear through armor. Flesh and bone were like paper to them. Impact would mean instant dismemberment. The tactic was cunning: throw a drowner as a decoy, then strike full force. At that distance and speed, there would normally be no time to react. But bolstered by full enhancement, Linn released his left hand from the sword and met the hag empty-handed. Ard. An invisible wave of force hit the swamp hag like a warhammer. Her fingers clenched and her skin cracked. Her body reeled back as if she'd smashed into a wall. The opening lasted only a heartbeat, but in combat, a single heartbeat can decide the outcome. The silver sword sliced into her neck like a hot knife through butter. Her head, a jumble of fury, resentment, and astonishment, flew into the air and plopped into the river, sending up a small ripple. As the end of the year 1249 approached and the heavy snows began to seal off the mountains, members of the Wolf School returned to Kaer Morhen. Everyone sat in the great hall, merry and full, enjoying food and wine and recounting the year's exploits. After the feast, Linn stood and volunteered that he wished to undergo the final stage of the Witcher trials before winter closed in, the Medallion Trial. The Medallion Trial, also called the Mountain Trial, is the third stage of the Witcher trials. Only by completing it does one earn the right to graduate and descend the mountain. Linn's announcement quieted the hall. Faces, including Vesemir's, turned toward him in surprise and puzzlement. He was still young. He could have stayed at Kaer Morhen for years if he chose, and no one would have protested. Witchers live a long time. Don't let Eskel and Lambert's youthful looks fool you. Their true ages are closer to folk like Arasaka Yorinobu's. Vesemir, for his part, could well be called a grandfather, even by Arasaka Saburo. Though witchers are born of humans, those who survive the trial of the grasses have a sense of time more like that of long-lived races such as elves or dwarves. Of course, Linn had his reasons for wanting to descend the mountain. Chapter 10. Linn will protect everyone. The main reason was simple. He felt his training on the mountain was approaching a plateau. His signs and alchemy were at master level, the formal standard for an initiated witcher. His Wolf School swordsmanship, however, had already reached Grandmaster, on par with veteran witchers like Geralt, who had weathered 1,000 battles. On top of that, the full enhancement specialty boosted his strength, speed, and constitution by another 20%. Despite his boyish looks, Linn was already stronger than most formally initiated witchers. Remaining on the mountain would let him keep gaining attribute points and improving by killing monsters, but it wasn't enough. With his ability to see possible futures, he knew he had to get stronger still. Only then could he hope to protect Kaer Morhen and everyone in the Wolf School. In the past, Linn had been merely an observer, mourning the outcomes he'd foreseen in the books and games. Now he was an active participant, and he had even less reason to stand idly by. Linn, your swordsmanship's improved fast, but being a witcher isn't just swords, Geralt said earnestly. Signs and alchemy need to be developed too if you want to be a proper witcher. Geralt thought Linn's confidence came from joining them on last year's mountain hunts. In swordplay alone, he agreed, Linn met the standard. But Linn had only studied signs a year, and alchemy hadn't been taught to him at all. A witcher who didn't understand alchemy couldn't be called a good witcher. Geralt meant well. He truly was looking out for Linn. What he didn't know was that Linn's Wolf School swordsmanship was fundamentally different now, arguably equal to the famed White Wolf's. His signs and alchemy were already at the standard of an initiated witcher. Linn had expected his brother's well-meaning doubts. I understand, Geralt, Linn said, and produced several brightly colored potions, laying them on the table. He'd brewed them himself in his spare time, using his master-level alchemy. They were all standard, well-made potions. Geralt, Eskel, and Lambert exchanged glances. Geralt picked up a bottle, studied the color, uncorked it, sniffed, glanced at Linn, and then drank it without hesitation. Lambert couldn't help but ask, Well, how is it? Vesemir and Eskel watched. Geralt set the empty bottle down, his face showing appreciation and a little puzzlement. It's good, he said. Then, curious, he asked Linn, How did you manage that? It wasn't jealousy. It was a helplessness of comparison. Comparing people leads to death. Comparing goods leads to discarding them. Geralt remembered how Vesemir's harsh, rote teaching had made learning alchemy a miserable, drawn-out ordeal. And yet this boy, who'd followed them as an apprentice last winter, had taught himself in a year what it had taken others years to learn. Now Geralt understood where Linn's confidence came from. Fortunately, Geralt didn't know Linn could not only produce standard potions, but do so quickly and reliably. Otherwise, once Linn's skill was verified, the room quieted. Even the sharp-tongued Lambert was unusually muted. All eyes turned to Vesemir. He sighed. In all his years as Grandmaster of the Wolf School, he'd trained countless apprentices. Many couldn't even endure the early physical regimen. Most didn't survive the trial of the grasses. Those who did sometimes died at the trial of the medallion or later on the road. As time passed, the training got harder. Linn was the youngest and most outstanding apprentice the Wolf School had seen in a long time. Contrary to popular belief, Witcher mutations didn't erase emotions, at least not among the Wolf School. Geralt's stoicism was often a shield against selfish commoners, but Vesemir, who had brought Linn back to Kaer Morhen years ago, had come to think of him almost as a son. If Linn hadn't asked to take the trial of the medallion, Vesemir wouldn't have forced it. But because it was Linn's own request, Vesemir rose from the table without a word and left the hall, leaving the others to exchange uneasy looks. What's wrong with the old man? Lambert muttered. Shut up, Lambert. You never know how to read the room, Geralt snapped, but Eskel, like an older brother, turned to Linn with genuine concern. Linn, you have talent. There's no denying that. You've reached initiated-level skills across the board, but you don't have to rush down the mountain. Stay here a few more years if you like. Times are hard, Eskel added bluntly, but we won't let you starve. Eskel thought Linn's eagerness came from not wanting to be a burden. That was part of it, but not the whole truth. Linn looked Eskel in the eye. Thank you. I appreciate it. There's just not much room left for me to grow if I stay cooped up on the mountain, Linn said. If you don't mind, I could go down with you, or with Geralt. There's more to learn out there, and traveling would ease Vesemir's burden. It seems like the better choice. Given how Linn had taught himself alchemy and acquired specialties as his skills improved, his character sheet seemed boundless. Going down the mountain with Geralt and the others would give him opportunities to learn new things and take weight off Vesemir. It was two birds with one stone. Geralt took a long pull from his mug. If you've thought it through, I respect your choice. I'll go with you to the trial of the medallion, and when the snow that seals the passes melts next year, I'll take you with me down the mountain. Chapter 11. We are a loving family. The mortality rate for most Witchers was highest during the first year after leaving the stronghold. Some died because villagers gave wrong descriptions of monsters. Others were lured into barns by greedy peasants who promised coin for a hunt and then drove a pitchfork into a Witcher's back when the reward wasn't forthcoming. The Witcher Code said those who survived the trials should leave their school, travel alone, and hunt monsters for pay. Geralt, Eskel, Lambert, Berengar, even old Vesemir had followed that path, but Geralt thought people didn't always flourish by following custom. Sometimes they benefited from staying put. The wolf school was dwindling. There was no need to cling to every old rule. He could make an exception for Linn. All right, Geralt said finally. I'll make the exception. Then I'll leave it to you, Geralt, Linn replied. Having Geralt, the sort of hero who always ended up in the story, as a companion seemed ideal. Eskel would do as well. Despite the half-healed scar across his face, he was kind. As for Lambert, if Linn were honest, he'd admit Lambert wasn't evil, but his mouth was foul enough to make a stable boy blush. If he had to travel with Lambert, Linn worried he might one night lose his temper and, in a fit, creak into Lambert's bed and smother him with a pillow. When Vesemir returned, he was carrying a silver wolf school medallion. Since you're taking the final trial, take this, he said. Carry it to the elemental circle at the mountain's summit. If you manage to activate it there, you won't be an apprentice any longer. You'll be a Witcher. Linn took the medallion from Vesemir and hung it around his neck. Geralt smiled. It suits you, Linn, he said, and led the way. Eskel nodded. Lambert, with his usual grimace, softened just a touch. If you come back alive tomorrow, he drawled, I'll stop calling you kid. About that, Lambert, Vesemir said, you'll take Linn to the medallion trial tomorrow. Lambert and Linn protested in the same breath. Why me? Why him? Vesemir's smile didn't falter. Normally, the medallion trial is done in teams of apprentices, but of the current group, only Linn survived. Someone must accompany him. Lambert spread his hands. Master Vesemir, I understand the reason, but why me? I'm not a nanny. Vesemir's expression grew stern. Linn is of the wolf school. He's your brother. I hope the trial will make that clear to you. He paused, then added, if it's not enough, you'll be responsible for Linn after he descends the mountain. Both men shivered. Lambert pulled an awkward smile that looked worse than a grimace. Ah, I'm sure we'll get along splendidly tomorrow, won't we, kid? Linn echoed stiffly. Of course, we are a loving family. After supper, they returned to their rooms. Linn volunteered to wash the dishes. When he came back to his room, Geralt leaned against the wall outside, arms crossed. Lambert's mouth is foul, he said flatly, and Eskel and I can't stand him sometimes, but he's an experienced Witcher. You do well to listen to him tomorrow. The medallion trial is unlike other tests. Whatever Lambert says, do it. If he's unpleasant, bear it for now. Once we're back, Eskel and I will handle him. Early the next morning, Lambert found Linn already packed and ready. You're eager, he observed. You look the part, but whether you've got the skill remains to be seen. Looks like I'll have to endure your grumbling all day, Linn replied. Of course, kid. I know you'd prefer Geralt or Eskel. Fine, I don't want to be a babysitter either. But listen, play is play, and mischief is mischief, and this trial is no joke. When I did it, only 2 of our lot came back. He met Linn's eyes. So if you want to face the sort of villagers who spit on you, promise a purse of gold and give you a pitchfork instead, or spend weeks fighting a Leshen only to find the coin won't even fix your sword, then you'd best stick close to me. Whatever I say, you do. Understood? Lambert expected Linn to brush him off. He expected stubbornness. Instead, Linn nodded seriously. The unexpected obedience made Lambert uncomfortable. He cleared his throat. Good. I sincerely hope we'll have a pleasant journey. First breakfast, he said, then we leave. They set out after a simple meal and an hour's rest. The medallion trial began with a swim across a lake, then passage through a Cyclops cave, across troll territory, and finally to the elemental circle. Only by activating the medallion there would the trial be complete. The most dangerous stretch was the Cyclops Cave. Trolls could be bargained with if you were careful, but a Cyclops was a different matter. Waking one was nearly always a fight to the death. Linn had heard that some of the children who had been grouped with Lambert had been taken by the Cyclops. Lambert, oddly cheerful as they left the keep, even mimicked Vesemir's tone. Only those who retrieve the medallion are fit to walk the Witcher's path. "Has Master Vesemir heard you do that?" Linn asked. "He has," Lambert admitted, "and he wasn't pleased. I try not to do it in front of him now." Then Lambert turned bluntly to Linn. "Kid, do you know what we're about to face?" Linn nodded. "The lake, the Cyclops, and the trolls." Lambert whistled. "Not bad. Did the old man tell you all that?" "No," Linn said. "I read it in books. I've read every book in the castle library. When I was your age, I couldn't sit still for a moment." Lambert suddenly sighed. "Vardy, he was just like you, always with a book. We used to joke he'd be better off at Oxenfurt than Kaer Morhen." "Vardy?" Linn asked. Lambert's voice went flat. "An apprentice I trained with. He didn't make it out of the Cyclops Cave." Linn frowned. "Lambert, I'm sorry. It's all right. It's in the past." Lambert forced a smile and patted his cheek as if to compose himself. "Back then we all swam across the lake, kid. You're lucky. I have a small boat. We can take it." Linn didn't answer. Lambert watched him for a moment and smiled again. "Hey, don't wear that face. I'm not as fragile as you think. Life and death are common in our line of work. I've seen plenty. Still," he hesitated, then added plainly, "I hope you make it, kid." They rowed in silence the rest of the way, until a dilapidated boathouse and a small boat tied to the dock came into view. Lambert's hand tightened on the reins. He froze. "Did you hear that?" "I did." "And I see it," Linn said, drawing the silver sword from his back and slipping into a fighting stance. A large shadow cut across the lake toward them. Harpies, circling above, spotted two witchers on the shore. With their sharp, keening calls, they split into two groups. One dive aimed at Linn, the other at Lambert. "Get back, kid!" Lambert shouted, throwing himself into the open to draw their attention. He stood like a rock, one hand on his sword, and waited until the harpy was almost on him. Then, with a swift, practiced motion, he switched to a two-handed grip. Geralt had been right. Lambert could be foul-mouthed, but his skill was undeniable. The harpy meant to use the speed of its dive to tear him apart. Instead, Lambert met it on the way down and cleaved through shoulder and chest in a single, brutal swing. It screamed and fell like a kite with a broken string. Lambert backstepped as the carcass rolled, then made the Ard sign with his left hand and sent a concussive palm toward another diving harpy. It slammed into an invisible wall, tumbled in the air, and struck the ground headfirst with a crack that twisted its neck into a grotesque angle. It twitched once and was still. Two dealt with in a heartbeat. The remaining harpies, driven by instinct, reacted differently. One fled, the other arced around for a sneak attack. Lambert's Witcher medallion vibrated violently. He didn't look back. He just shifted his body and sidestepped the strike coming from behind. The silver blade flashed, and the harpy's head separated from its body, rolling to the ground. Lambert glanced after the escaping bird, confirmed he couldn't catch it, and turned toward Linn. He found the younger Witcher already finished with his own fight. When Lambert had shouted for Linn to fall back, Linn had obeyed, not out of fear or to flee, but to draw the harpies to terrain that favored a Witcher. Harpies were deadly in flight, diving and climbing away, but on the ground they were awkward and clumsy. There was a small grove near the boathouse. Linn rolled, not ran, into it, using the trees to break the bird's flight paths. One harpy misjudged its turn and smacked a tall spruce with a wing, lost balance, and fell beak first to the earth. Linn closed in, raised the silver sword high, and brought it down. The blade bit deep, nearly slicing half the skull off. Linn planted his boot in the creature's chest, kicked it aside, and drew the blood-streaked sword free. A putrid gust hit then, the stink of rot and bird droppings. Linn rolled aside and, without hesitating, cast Igni. A serpentine jet of fire lanced into the spot he'd just occupied. The fire found feathers like kindling. One harpy erupted in flames and thrashed wildly, trying to smother itself. The other was singed across the wings, enough to keep it grounded. Ungainly on the earth, the remaining harpy lunged clumsily. Linn met it with an Ard blast to stun, then shifted his weight and struck. He drove the silver sword forward like a bolt from a crossbow. The blade pierced the creature's throat. Warmness surged through him. He called up his attribute panel and watched the numbers tick. Attribute points, 0, 2%, 0, 19%. Chapter 13. Well said, don't say it next time. Well done, Lambert said, glancing at the bodies on the ground, a rare trace of approval in his eyes. How do you feel? I'm fine. Linn wiped blood from his silver sword on a harpy's feathers. Lambert shrugged, a little surprised. Look at all these corpses, the sickening stench of blood in the air, that sour mix of rot and bird droppings from the harpies, and you're fine? It seems you were born to be a witcher. Only after Lambert said that did Linn realize. Standing amid the piles of corpses, surrounded by the overwhelming stench, he felt no urge to vomit. It wasn't that he couldn't smell anything. Witcher's senses were far keener than ordinary people's, but he felt no panic, no nausea, no fear. Nor was he exhilarated like a madman. He was simply very calm. Maybe, as Lambert said, he truly was a born witcher. After stripping useful parts from the harpies, the two climbed into Lambert's skiff. I'll steer. Why? Because it's my boat. Know why. The lake was clear in the early morning. There was no mist, and Linn could easily make out the cave entrance on the far bank. The small boat glided across the water, leaving a long, slender ripple that spread outward like scales across the surface. Eventually they landed. There was no post or cleat to tie the boat to, so Linn helped Lambert drag it ashore to keep it from being carried off by the current. Both could swim, but riding in a boat was preferable to slogging through the water. Let's see, what was that old saying? Tread lightly, don't wake Old Spearhead. Old Spearhead was the Cyclops that had made its home in the cave for as long as anyone could remember. He was a notoriously difficult examiner during Witcher trials. Many apprentices had failed because of him. Cyclopes lived long lives. No one really knew how old Old Spearhead was. How about we take a sharpened wooden stake, drive it into his eye, and slip out dressed as sheep, Lambert suggested. Ha, good one. Don't say that again. As they bantered, a faint cry drifted from the reeds along the bank. Linn turned to look, but saw only tall, dense cattails. Lambert glanced at him. Did you hear that? Linn nodded. I did. And? Ignore it. He had heard a child cry for help. Lambert had heard it too, so it wasn't a trick of his imagination. But Kaer Morhen lay deep in the Blue Mountains, and their current spot was even further in. Not even villagers from the mountain's foothills would usually venture this far. The books in Kaer Morhen's library, however, contained a warning Linn remembered clearly. There is a ghastly creature called a foglet. Masters of deception and luring, they dwell where fog gathers. Swamps, passes, riverbanks, and lakes. If no fog exists, foglets can summon their own. When the air grows heavy and still with no wind, a foglet may be near. The fog does more than hide them. It is their weapon. They manipulate it to isolate travelers, obscure paths, and muffle sounds. They emit faint, firefly-like lights to attract the lost toward their nests in swamps, caves, or ravines. Sometimes they need not attack directly. They can drive prey insane and shepherd them into a swamp to drown. Recalling that entry, Linn was almost certain the child's voice had been mimicked to lure them. Oh, aren't we going to check it out? Lambert said with an irritating air. Maybe there's a poor child who needs our help. Linn gave him an exasperated look. Do I look like a 3-year-old? I think you look 4. Linn didn't bother to be civil. He gave Lambert the finger. Well said. Don't say it again next time. Playtime over, they returned to business. Ready to enter the cave? Lambert asked. Linn nodded. Lambert's smile vanished. Before we go in, drink a cat potion. You remember what it does? Linn became serious. Cat is one of the most common Witcher potions. You take it before entering dark places, caves, crypts, or when lingering in dangerous areas at night. It lets you see in total darkness and prevents you from being ambushed by nocturnal creatures. It also lets you perceive ordinary beings, even things composed of inanimate matter, sometimes through walls. But, like other Witcher elixirs, it causes a small buildup of toxins. Lambert nodded and handed him a vial. Looks like you've got it all memorized. Good. He took his own cat potion and drank it. In that cave lives a cyclops called Old Spearhead. Don't ask how long he's been there. He was already old when I was your age. Lambert held up 2 fingers. What I'm about to tell you, you must never forget. When we go in, only two things can happen. The first, and most common, is that Old Spearhead is fast asleep. If we don't make noise, we can slip by. Linn nodded. He knew the cave held only Old Spearhead and no other monsters. If they didn't wake him, that would be success. What about the second? Linn asked. Lambert fell silent for a moment. The second is what happened to me during my trial. We have to escape from an awakened Old Spearhead. Obviously, it's not something any of us want to see. So from now on, tiptoe your steps, even your breathing should be careful. Well, Chapter 14. You must attack the minion with taunt first. After drinking the cat potion and waiting for it to take effect, Linn and Lambert slipped into the foul-smelling cave. It was pitch black, no light at all, but the potion granted them night vision. They followed Lambert through the dark for several minutes. Suddenly Lambert stopped, raised a hand, clenched his fist, and whispered, "Wait, did you hear that?" Linn froze and listened, but all he could hear was their own breathing. He shook his head. No. Exactly. No snoring. Means Old Spearhead isn't asleep. Damn. Lambert's low curse carried an expression Linn had never seen on him before. Kid, if I tell you to run later, you run. Don't stop. Don't look back. Understand? Linn wasn't foolish. He knew what Lambert meant. If things went wrong, Lambert would make an opening for him to get away. The wolf school didn't abandon its brothers. He repeated it silently, then nodded. They moved on. After a few more paces, Lambert halted again. Linn looked ahead and saw, in a slightly wider chamber beneath a raised stone platform, a one-eyed giant with a huge wooden club leaning against its shoulder. There was only one path through the open space. The platform was the only exit. Old Spearhead was guarding it. It was the worst-case scenario. I'll draw it away, Lambert said quickly. You climb up when you can. What about you? Linn asked. Kid, I've crossed more bridges than you've walked roads. Worry about yourself. Lambert cut him off, drew his silver sword, and charged, shouting. One-eyed giants weren't stupid. Bandits might let a traveler go, but not giants. Old Spearhead's roar shook dust from the ceiling. It swung its club, sending up grit and pebbles. Lambert dodged and retreated, then seized an opening and released an Axie sign. The sign took hold. Old Spearhead froze, bewildered. Linn used the chance to slip up onto the stone platform and turn to watch. If Lambert had used that moment to run, he could have climbed up before Old Spearhead recovered. Instead, Lambert lunged in and slashed at the giant's foot. Silver cut deep. A dark, reddish-black blood poured from the wound. The pain snapped Old Spearhead back to awareness. Its hand, huge as a cattail fan, swung instinctively. Lambert had no time to dodge, but old habits died hard. He almost reflexively threw up a Quen sign. The golden shield shattered the force, and Lambert was hurled like a sack. Lambert, damn it! Linn hissed and jumped from the platform without drawing his sword. He picked up a loose stone and hurled it at Old Spearhead. The hit hardly harmed the giant, but it was an insult, and that was enough. The giant had planned to go after Lambert first. Instead, it turned its wrath on the black-haired little wolf cub who had dared pelt it. Seeing Old Spearhead's attention pulled, Linn backed away while silently judging distance. Now, he told himself. He drew his silver sword and hurled it. The blade flew like a meteor and struck Old Spearhead's single eye full on. Warm, foul-smelling ichor spurted. A piercing scream echoed through the cave as the giant clamped both hands over its face, a pale green goo running between its huge fingers. It grabbed the club and began to sweep everything around it in a blind, furious arc. When a giant, many times the size of a husky, starts tearing down its own home, the effect is like a storm. Dust and loose rock filled the air. The swinging club sent shards and rubble flying like bolts. Linn had calculated the safe distance. No matter how wildly Old Spearhead vented, the club wouldn't reach him or the Lambert who'd been knocked flying. He kept the Quen sign up, letting the shield absorb the splintering debris and the hurtling stones. The onslaught lasted for more than 10 brutal minutes before the giant finally exhausted itself. Gasping and panting, it sat down hard, too tired to stand. Linn moved silently. Witcher mutations allowed precise control of the body's smallest sounds. He crept to Old Spearhead's back and stepped onto it before the giant reacted. It lunged to grab him, but Linn ducked and rolled away. On the other side, Lambert staggered out of the still-settling dust and slashed at the wounded foot again. Old Spearhead's roar turned into a keening wail and its massive form buckled like a collapsing mountain. Linn seized the moment and leapt onto the giant's back. "Catch!" he called. From below, Lambert tossed his silver sword up. "Good night. Sleep tight," he said. Linn caught the blade, and together with Lambert's push, they drove it home into the nape of Old Spearhead's neck. The sword sank to the hilt. The giant wailed, its life force drained away. A hot current of warmth, the same fierce surge Linn remembered when he had dispatched the swamp hag, flowed along the silver sword into his body. Attribute points 0, 19%, 0, 69%. Chapter 15. This is way ahead. Linn used his hunting knife to strip infusion shards, monster hearts, and cyclops eyes from Old Spearhead's carcass, muttering to himself the whole time. The trial of the medallion, the final part of the Witcher trials, is no joke. Still, putting apprentices up against a newbie killer like Hogger right away, doesn't that verge on cruel? He wondered whether all Witchers talk to themselves. Since coming to this world and becoming a Witcher, Linn had noticed he sometimes spoke aloud without realizing it. It wasn't a fatal flaw. When he finished collecting the ingredients, he jumped off the corpse and went over to Lambert. "You all right, Lambert?" "Yeah, not dead." Lambert uncorked a swallow potion and drank. Within minutes, his color improved markedly. Witchers heal faster than ordinary folk, and with a swallow, unless an injury is instantly fatal, recovery is usually possible. "What were you raving about back there?" Linn asked. Lambert sighed. "Kid, I swear I'll never call you kid again. On one condition, you stop asking questions. Fair deal?" Linn met Lambert's cat-like gaze and said nothing. He already knew, even if Lambert didn't speak it aloud, the child Lambert had mentioned, Wardher, had died at Old Spearhead's hands. People like to say Witchers had no feelings, that they cared only for coin, that mutants were heartless beasts. People were wrong. Linn didn't press Lambert. He laid a hand on the other Witcher's shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze. "Let's get out of here." More than 10 minutes later, they emerged from the foul-smelling cave. "Finally out," Lambert said, hands on his hips, and sighed up at the sky. Linn agreed. Humans needed fresh air and sunlight. Even though they'd been below ground less than an hour, it felt like a lifetime. "Next," Linn said, "we just need to cross the troll's territory to reach the elemental circle." Lambert's lips twisted into a grin. "They're the ones who should be worried, not us." Perhaps avenging Wardher had put Lambert in a better mood. Linn remained neutral. He didn't have a poor opinion of trolls. In the past, trolls did sometimes prey on humans, but those incidents had become rarer. Some trolls liked to build bridges and collect tolls from travelers. In Novigrad, the Pearl of the North, hiring a troll as a guard had even become fashionable. After all, the job required loyalty, enormous strength, and endless endurance. Intelligence mattered less. In fact, too much cleverness was often seen as a disadvantage. The best guards, it was said, were dull enough not to contemplate betraying their masters. As the two reached the troll's territory, they expected a rain of boulders. What met them was something very different. "Get out!" two rock trolls shouted, picking up stones and throwing them into the air. Harpies swooped in above, fast and nimble. They easily avoided the rocks. Then the harpies dived, screeching. The rock trolls crouched, body curled to present their stony backs. The harpies' talons scraped and sent sparks flying, but did no real damage. Linn and Lambert stared. "What the?" Lambert said. The last time he'd passed this way, there had been only rock trolls here. They'd had to dodge thrown boulders to get to the elemental circle. He'd expected the same now, but instead the monsters were fighting one another. "They're fighting over food," Linn said, pointing. A pile of raw game lay some distance away, guarded by a much smaller young troll. "They actually stockpiled food for winter. Who's going to call trolls stupid now?" Lambert nodded. "Still, it's an opening for us." Before Linn could answer, the skirmish shifted. The two adult trolls, apparently driven off by the harpies, moved away from the food, leaving the young troll alone. Several harpies read the chance and swooped in. The young troll, smart as it was small, curled down to protect its soft belly and presented its stony back to the enemies. This time, however, the harpies did not merely pass by. They latched onto the protrusions on the young troll's back and lifted it into the air, clearly intent on dropping it to its death. The young troll thrashed and kicked, but its short limbs and turtle-like back structure left it powerless against the grasping harpies. Then a flash of silver shot out from a distance and struck one of the harpies square in the chest. It shrieked and tumbled to the ground. Another harpy's expression froze, then it suddenly turned on its companion and struck savagely. A neck was slit with a spray of blood. The wounded harpy fell, dying. The remaining harpies hesitated, bewildered, then dropped the young troll and swarmed toward the harpy that had turned on its own kind. On the ground, Linn extracted his silver sword from the fallen harpy. At the same time, Lambert cast the Ard sign at the harpies still in the air. The harpy he targeted abruptly went berserk and attacked its fellows, the same way the first maddened harpy had. That, Linn thought, is the effect of Ard. It can influence, unsettle, and even turn creatures against one another. Even non-intelligent beasts feel it. Chapter 16. I have seen the noblest orcs, and I have also seen the most despicable humans. With Linn and Lambert's help, the harpies besieging the rock trolls were soon either slain or driven off. When the last of the harpies fled, the rock trolls finally noticed two uninvited guests in their territory. The atmosphere grew tense. Linn was the first to break the silence. "Hey, I just helped you," he said. "Have you forgotten so quickly?" "Help?" The adult rock trolls scratched their heads in confusion. They made no hostile move, which was a promising start. Linn nodded toward the scattered harpy corpses. The three trolls, two large, one small, looked at each other, then back at Linn and the bodies. After a long pause, one of the larger trolls spoke slowly. "Witcher help, troll? Witcher good?" Linn patted his chest. "That's right, we're good people." The other adult troll frowned. "You stupid. Witchers kill monsters. Trolls are monsters." "No," Linn said. "Witchers only kill monsters that harm people. Harpies harm people, so we helped you with them. You don't harm people, so you don't need to worry about us." The three trolls stared at one another. Their faces showed genuine bewilderment, as if their brains had been scrambled. Finally, the troll who had first spoken repeated, disbelief in his voice. "Witchers don't kill trolls? Yes, we won't kill you, so long as you don't harm people. Witchers good. Trolls don't harm people. Witchers don't kill trolls. Trolls don't eat witchers." The three trolls brightened at the logic and reached a cheerful consensus. They even invited Linn and Lambert to stay and eat before the two witchers left. Both declined politely. Troll food, while perfectly digestible for trolls, was of a brutal, raw sort, something humans could stomach only with difficulty. Better to pass. Before they left, Linn asked one favor. If any witcher apprentices, 2 swords, a medallion, pass through the area, please don't throw stones at them. The elemental circle altar sat on the mountain behind troll territory. A smooth, wind-worn stone platform held a few candles and 4 braziers, one at each cardinal point. Walking among the ruined stones, Linn could almost imagine the ceremonial grandeur that had once been here. With the decline of Kaer Morhen and the Wolf School, all that remained were echoes and broken masonry. Lambert couldn't help asking, "I still don't understand why you helped the trolls." Linn answered seriously, "Humans aren't always noble, and trolls aren't always despicable. If you can talk to someone, why fight to the death? Besides, there was no bounty." Lambert rolled his eyes. "If an Oxenford assistant professor said that, I'd understand, but you're a witcher." "Witchers only kill monsters that harm people," Linn replied. "Have you forgotten everything Vesemir taught you?" "Fine, I won't argue." Lambert gestured toward the braziers. "Let's activate the medallion and get back. I can't wait to wash this harpy stench off." Linn grimaced. "You city boy, can't stand a little dirt and smell?" Lambert scowled. "Ha! If you're so brave, don't wash and sleep with that stink." "I'd rather not." Linn smiled faintly. "All right, time to be serious. I guess the books in the castle told you how an elemental circle works?" Linn nodded and studied the 4 braziers. An elemental circle, like places of power, is where chaotic energy concentrates. The braziers aren't placed at random. You must light them in the correct order to activate the circle. Sorcerers say magic comes from nature, earth, water, air, fire, so you light them following those elements. He snapped his fingers 4 times, and one by one the braziers flared to life in the right sequence. Then he took the wolf head medallion from his neck and set it on the stone platform. Watching Linn work, Lambert couldn't help a smirk. "Works a lot faster with someone who knows what they're doing. I don't even have to say anything. The medallion will absorb the magic on its own, Linn said. We just wait. Lambert motioned for Linn to sit. While we're at it, though it's a bit early to talk about this, you'll be leaving the mountain next year, so consider this a bit of social etiquette in advance. Linn sat beside him. I'm listening. In our line of work, ideals look good on paper, but reality's a mess. We hunt monsters, but common folk often treat us like monsters. Lambert's voice carried a bitter edge. Linn felt the old familiar weight settle in his chest. Berengar's disgust with the Witcher name, the world's contempt. Lambert went on. Many Witchers left the mountain at first with high ideals. If people couldn't pay, they would accept nothing at first, thinking it noble. But soon they learned better. In the north, commoners will take advantage of you. That's what they do. The reason they're commoners isn't just their suffering under kings and nobles. It's that they don't unite. They don't resist. When they're angry, they take it out on honest, hard-working folk around them. Not all northerners are like that, of course, but in Kaedwen at least, more than half are. That's not an inherent flaw of human nature. It's the fault of respected King Henselt. I've seen thieves who look like counselors, counselors who look like beggars, prostitutes who look like princesses, princesses who look like sow-bellies, and kings who look like thieves. Henselt may not look like a thief, but he's not far off. He wants to eliminate all non-humans in his realm, those who bled for him and honest, tax-paying non-human citizens alike. You can imagine what such a ruler thinks of Witchers. Linn had heard all of this before. King Henselt had a reputation as one of the worst among the northern kings, arguably worse even than Radovid V of Redania. Radovid was brutal, but he had talent. In later times, had Radovid not been assassinated, he might have not only defeated Nilfgaard, but united the north under his rule. Chapter 17. This old man is very bad. What about Henselt? Lambert grumbled. That old scoundrel is truly wicked. In the future, Nilfgaard to the south launched the Second Northern War. After the First Northern War, every northern king should have understood the threat Nilfgaard posed and united. Most of them did. Only Henselt of Kaedwen, seeing Eredin distracted by the Nilfgaardians, brazenly sent his troops in to seize Edirn's lands. Then he even shook hands with the Nilfgaardian marshal and agreed on the partition. No shame at all. To the west of Kaedwen lies Redania, Geralt added. Redania's king, Vizimir II, called the Just, manages his realm well and keeps good relations with neighbors. He's also fairly tolerant of Witchers. That's why we get many contracts there and seldom have to deal with unpaid fees. Lambert nodded. If you're asking where Witchers are most comfortable, one is Marshal Skellige, a warrior people who settle most things with drink and steel. Another is the fabled land of knights, Toussaint, where the vineyards flow and life's a fairy tale. And then there's Kovir and Povis. I've never been to Toussaint, Lambert sighed. If you ever do, bring me back a bottle. All right, go take a look. Should be ready now, Vesemir said. Linn walked to the stone platform. The medallion sitting there hummed, its charge complete. He reached out, and as soon as his hand touched the platform, he felt a surge of magic flow from the stone into his palm. Startled, he lifted the medallion off the stone, and the feeling stopped. He thought for a moment, set the medallion back, and the sensation returned. What's wrong? Lambert asked from behind. Nothing. Just wait a moment. Linn closed his eyes and concentrated. He discovered he could either let the magic that had pooled in his hand flow into his body or simply pull away and ignore it. The magic felt gentle, like a comfortably warm bath. After a moment's hesitation, he relaxed and allowed it to sink in. The Witcher medallion in his palm trembled as the energy flowed. He could feel the elemental circle's power seeping up his arm and into him. He opened his attribute panel and watched the numbers shift as more magic was absorbed. So that's how it works, he murmured, eyes bright. He drank the magic in with eager hands until the flow slowed and finally stopped, as if the stream had run dry. He checked the panel and stared in astonishment. Attribute points, 0, 69%, 5. Absorbing the elemental circle had granted him a direct 431% experience boost. Grinning, Linn dumped all the new points into signs. Signs, proficiency, master limit. New specialty, magic absorption increases magic recovery speed by 20%. As the signs entry changed, The chaotic energy already inside him began to roil. Instinctively, he lifted his hand, and a roaring, blistering flame leapt from his palm. If he'd had this power months earlier against the swamp hag, a master-level Ard might have hurled her away instead of merely tripping her. Not only that, but after he released the sign, he felt the consumed chaotic magic replenishing far faster than before. Excellent. If a common witcher's igni is like a lighter, Lambert breathed, staring, then what he just did was a flamethrower. Could he actually be a genius? By nightfall, they were back at Kaer Morhen. To celebrate Linn's success with the medallion, Vesemir produced a cask of wine he normally never shared. Vesemir guarded his cellar fiercely. Lambert once tried to sneak in and was chased for miles, but tonight the old man uncorked treasure. Geralt and Eskel cooked up a feast. The smell of roasting meat made everyone's mouths water. "Cheers!" someone called, and they sat around the fire, faces lit by flame. The mountains were bitterly cold, but laughter and the hearth chased the chill away. Vesemir drank more than usual, and soon was pleasantly, conclusively drunk. Several hands lifted him and carried him off to his room. "You know," Lambert said to Geralt as they watched the old man go, "I've never seen Vesemir drunk before." Geralt shrugged. "Once, a very, very long time ago. I barely remember what about." They returned to the hall, and the revelry went on late. Linn remembered doing foolish, probably embarrassing things, though the exact details were hazy. He slept heavily and didn't wake until the sun rode high the next day, head pounding. He drank water, ran several laps around Kaer Morhen in the cold wind until he sobered somewhat, then came back to find the hall a mess. Geralt and the others were asleep where they'd fallen. Linn quietly tidied, hauling them back to their rooms one by one. When people spend their days yearning for some future moment to arrive, time slips through their fingers unnoticed. One day they look back and wonder how the days flew so fast. By March of 1250, the mountains were still cold, but the Lieren were ready to set off. Lambert took a few steps back and appraised Linn from head to toe. A rare look of approval crossed his face. Good. Very spirited. Linn had changed into the standard Wolf School medium armor, the same as the others. 2 swords were strapped to his back, one steel, the other silver. Witcher's steel and silver swords were hand-and-a-half blades, not single-handed. They were longer and better for cutting and slashing than single-handed swords, and easier to carry than full 2-handed weapons. No wonder they were common in the stories. Vesemir's eyes were a little red. That set of equipment had been prepared years ago, ever since he had taken Linn in and brought him back to Kaer Morhen. He had never imagined it would be needed so soon. Lambert, who was always squabbling with Vesemir, fell silent when he saw the old man's expression. Geralt cleared his throat. "Linn, I know you've reached the level of a master, but don't let it go to your head. In our time, you had to go down the mountain alone after the trial," Geralt continued, "but rules change. For now, you'll come with me. We'll travel together." Beside them, Eskel added, "Many witchers who finished all their trials died within a few years of leaving the mountain. And not always at the hands of monsters," he went on. "Often they were killed by humans. That's inexperience. When you're with Geralt, watch and learn." Vesemir stepped forward to say his piece. As he spoke, he seemed like any other old man, full of stories and warnings. Linn listened without impatience. At last, Vesemir sighed. "It used to be simple. Monsters bad, people good. Now everything's complicated." Geralt snorted. "It was always complicated. You're just getting old and forgetful." "Don't talk to me about age," Vesemir shot back. "You're decades old yourself." Then Vesemir boomed more earnestly. "Child, never forget, a witcher must stay neutral. Don't let yourself be dragged into politics or schemes." Linn nodded. He looked at Geralt. Geralt blinked in mild surprise. "Why are you staring at me?" Linn had mounted behind Geralt, riding on Roach as they left the Blue Mountains. Kaer Morhen receded behind them, tucked into the hills. Vesemir was always the last to leave and the first to return. He would clean and ready the castle, which had stood empty for a year, to welcome the Wolf School like a father preparing his home. It was Vesemir's insistence that they return every winter that kept the Wolf School so close. "Linn, listen to Geralt," Vesemir called after them. "I don't want you, the last witcher of the Wolf School, missing our winter gathering." Lambert rode up on Geralt's left. Before he could say more, Eskel cut in. Linn won't be the last Witcher. With the law of surprise or without it, we can still find fresh blood among the poor families who can't raise another child. Lambert snorted. Those parents would sooner send their kids to learn a trade in the city, something that keeps them fed, than have them taken and despised as witchers. He shrugged. Of course, that's assuming someone survives the trial of the grasses. Lambert wasn't like Geralt or Eskel. He'd grown up with a drunk for a father who beat him and his mother. Later, a witcher had saved his father, and the price of that favor was Lambert. That was why Lambert hated the trial of the grasses and the practice of taking children. He didn't want what happened to him to happen to others. Eskel gave him a puzzled look. What's gotten into you today, Lambert? Lambert avoided the look. Nothing. I just keep thinking, monsters are thinning out. Why keep training more witchers? From behind Geralt, Linn spoke up quietly. Because if witchers die out, who will deal with monsters when the next sphere conjunction happens? He went on, calm and measured. Originally, this world was home only to gnomes and some now extinct lizard folk. Dwarves and elves arrived later. Humans came after them. When sphere conjunctions occurred in the past, creatures from other worlds poured in and threatened everyone. Over centuries, through witchers' tireless work, monsters have been driven back and become rarer. Just because villages no longer post bounties for witchers doesn't mean the conjunctions have stopped. They're natural, like the tides, like day and night. They can't be prevented. Maybe someday monsters will be truly gone, but if another conjunction brings beasts from elsewhere, this world will need witchers again. Linn knew the age they were entering was a once-in-a-century upheaval. Kings, nobles, and common folk alike would be swept up. Even the sorcerers, those who had created witchers and once served as advisors to northern rulers, would soon face downfall. The Brotherhood of Sorcerers, long thought indestructible, would unravel under its own ambition. With the Brotherhood's fall, the sorcerer's status would collapse almost overnight. Once revered magicians would be stripped of influence and often killed or burned at the stake. It was the worst of times and the best of times. Chapter 19. The world is changing, but the scenery here is unique. Eskel and Lambert parted company with Linn and Geralt at the foot of the Blue Mountains. No one could afford to hire several witchers at once. If they accepted one fee and split it, the pay would be too small. Witchers usually worked alone for that reason. Eskel and Lambert headed west together, planning to pass through Kaedwen and then on to Redania. King Vizimir of Redania was known as the Just, and Witcher's prospects there were neither especially good nor especially bad. Redania was the strongest power in the north at the moment, prosperous, proud, the kind of place whose people wore their dignity openly. Witchers working in Redania could, in most cases, expect to be paid. They would not face the kinds of hard-luck folk found in Kaedwen who begged, "Can't you spare this for pity's sake? You inhuman mutant! Damned freak! May the plague take you!" If nothing disrupted their plans, Lambert might remain in Redania until the end of the year before returning to Kaer Morhen. Eskel intended to try his luck in Temeria, Redania's southern neighbor. Foltest, Temeria's king, held a similarly indifferent attitude toward witchers. There was, however, a province in Temeria called Velen that Eskel planned to avoid. Linn and Geralt went south from Kaedwen toward Aedern. Kaedwen and Aedern were forever quarreling over borderlands. Henselt of Kaedwen coveted a strip of territory that sparked frequent, savage clashes. The ground between them drew ghouls after every fight, so Geralt figured there might be work along that frontier. They knew Kaedwen folk were exceptionally unfriendly to witchers and had no intention of loitering in towns. Geralt steered Linn away from settlements. They hunted and fished to supplement food, moving mostly by the forest roads and streams. "Hey, you two, come here," a voice called. Near Kaedwen's southern border, they ran into a squad of soldiers by the road. As the two groups passed, the man in front, clearly the captain, wheeled and shouted to them. Geralt, with his habitual sarcasm, replied, "Respected captain, I wasn't aware that walking properly on the road was now a crime in Kaedwen." The captain ignored the tone and said, "There's a job for you filthy mutants." A few days passed an Edirnian force, disguised as a merchant caravan, crossed the border and was discovered by our men. They were routed, left many corpses, and fled back to Aedern. Before we could clear the field, ghouls moved in. Geralt shrugged. So you need 2 witchers to see if the ghouls have eaten their fill, and if not, you want us to top them up? The captain barked a laugh. Always witty. Who said all witchers are heartless? There's a reward. I know you mutants won't work for nothing. Geralt didn't accept immediately. A reward? Fine, but we need numbers. How much? The captain held up 6 fingers. 60 ducats. Ducats were a common coin across regions like Eredin, Skellige, and Cadwyn. Not the highest value money, but serviceable. Novigrad crowns were usually more reliable. Novigrad was the pearl of the north, wealthy and neutral, its gold coins trusted, and the city itself was famous for its beauty. Geralt shook his head. 60? That's too little. After haggling, the captain raised the offer to 100 ducats, and the deal was struck. Geralt and Linn followed the captain's directions to the ruined battlefield. They walked along the road for half an hour, then left the wagon tracks and began to pick up a trail. Witchers were expert trackers, years in the wild, and their mutations gave them heightened senses that made the world look different to them. When they tuned their witcher senses, scents and traces invisible to ordinary people stood out like signs. After more than an hour, they found the place. Where there should have been only corpses and feeding ghouls, a living soul sat terrified on the roof of an overturned wagon. A southerner merchant clung to the timber, surrounded by ghouls circling below. Ghouls moved on all fours and couldn't jump like they could climb. For now, the man was safe from being dragged down, but only until the creatures figured out how to scale the wagon with their claws. "Help!" he cried. Geralt and Linn exchanged a look and drew their silver swords. They layered Quen on themselves, the faint shimmer of the shields settling around them, and crept forward low. When the ghouls at last sensed movement and whirled to see who approached, the 2 stopped pretending to be hidden and smashed their feet into the ground, charging. Linn shaped Ard with his left hand and let loose a master-level push. A wall of force fanned out like a breaking tide and smashed into the rush, scattering the leaping ghouls. Linn stepped in, his silver flashing as he stabbed through neck and ribs. When the second ghoul fell, the others scrambled up and hurled themselves forward again. Linn's mana-drain specialization had already returned some of the recently spent power. Calmly, he struck the earth. A ring of purple light bloomed around him. When the remaining ghouls crossed into it, their limbs slowed as if trapped in quicksand. Linn moved unhindered within the trap. In the next moments, swordlight danced, flesh and blood flew, and wails echoed everywhere. Chapter 20. The 3 of Us Killed. Linn moved like a shadow, weaving through the ghouls with lithe precision. Their speed was hampered by a strong slowing effect, and he slipped between their attacks, leaving clean, bloody wounds in his wake. Before long, the creatures lay dead at his feet. Not a single one had even grazed his clothes. A warm current ran through him as he absorbed the experience points. By Geralt's side, the fight had long since ended. Lifeless ghouls were scattered about the ground where he stood, swords sheathed and blood drying on his boots. When the southerner saw that the 2 witchers had cut down every last beast, he clambered down from the top of his wagon. He paused to stare at the bodies of his caravan hands for a moment, a flash of grief passing over his face, then swaggered over to the witchers, hands on his hips and a smug grin plastered on. "The 3 of us were splendid, just slaughtered them," he declared. Linn raised an eyebrow. "The 3 of us? You seem to be doing the slaughtering while we did the actual killing." The southerner didn't lose his smile. No hint of embarrassment. "Don't be so earnest. Life's a play. If you take it too seriously, you lose, my friend." Seeing how shameless he was, Linn didn't hold back. "Your performance was clumsy then." All right, I admit it. You saved my life. Happy now, Hunter Master?" The southerner gave a mock French military salute. "They say witchers have no emotions. That rumor's wrong, I think." Linn shot back. "They also say that when someone saves you, you show genuine gratitude instead of passive-aggressive banter." Geralt stepped in at the right moment. "Gentlemen, I'm afraid this isn't the place for small talk." He nodded toward the pile of bodies. "If you don't mind, sir, we need to burn these remains. The smell of blood will draw more ghouls if we leave them." "Of course, Hunter Master. Do as you wish." The Southerner shuffled aside and watched as Linn and Geralt stacked the ghouls and set the pile alight. "Forgive my impertinence," he said when the flames were crackling, "but how did two witchers happen to be passing by?" Geralt countered, "That's our question. What are you doing here?" The Southerner sighed dramatically. "My friend said Northerners couldn't be trusted. I thought he was exaggerating. Now I see he was right. I'd rather starve, die outside, or jump off a roof than come to the north again." Linn and Geralt exchanged a look. Both felt the same prickling of unease. "You're not an Aedern soldier disguised as a merchant, are you?" Linn asked. The Southerner leapt as if his tail had been stepped on. "Aedern soldier? I'm from Ebbing. Do you know where Ebbing is?" Both witchers nodded. Ebbing was one of the 4 large vassal states of the Nilfgaardian South, afforded a degree of autonomy after being annexed in 1239. It wasn't unheard of for southern merchants to travel north, but the Cadwen captain who'd sent out the commission had explicitly said those they'd routed were Aedern troops disguised as a merchant caravan. Such contradictions raised red flags. Linn's first commission had been met with suspicion. Apparently, every society loved to wave cold water over newcomers. He asked, "So what were you doing here?" The Southerner brightened as if given a chance to complain. Toussaint's famous wine, East of East, has a reputation in the South. It's high-grade and expensive. Hardly anyone brings East of East to the north. I wanted to be the first. A few months after I arrived in Cadwen, during a border inspection, a guard captain told me he could sell the wine for me. I wouldn't have to peddle it myself. He wanted half the profits. He shrugged. 50-50 was steep, but it saved me time. I agreed. After a few shipments, he demanded more, 70%. He wanted to give me only 30. He spat a little. I refused. I'd run back and forth between Toussaint and Cadwen, dodge bandits, avoid monsters, pay my men. 30% won't even keep me fed. So I said, if it didn't stay 50-50, that was the last deal. He scowled. They didn't take that well. Linn put it plainly. They resorted to violence, killed you and your men, left your bodies, and used ghouls to take care of the evidence. Then, unsatisfied, hired 2 witchers to burn the corpses so nothing would be left. The Southerner's eyes went wide. He'd put the pieces together too. His gaze flicked between the 2 witchers with growing wariness. "You," Geralt, calm as ever, said, "don't be nervous. We kill monsters. No one pays us to burn living people. But I am curious. How did you survive?" Hearing that Geralt and Linn had no intention of drawing swords on him, the Southerner exhaled a huge, relieved breath. "At last, one rumor's true. Even mutated men have principles." He laughed, then sobered. "Thank you, Huntermaster." He told them the rest while rummaging through his pockets and finding them empty. "It was chaos. An arrow hit my horse and it threw me. Blood from the horse ran over me, so I pretended to be dead. They didn't finish me off. But those bastards took everything. My coin, my goods. I have nothing to repay you." Linn waved him off generously. "It's fine. Since we saved you, we're not going to hand you back to the ghouls just because you're penniless. Go home, man from Ebbing."